They called her too heavy, too much, completely undesirable. But when Jordan spilled expensive whiskey on the most feared syndicate boss in the city, he didn't pull a gun. He looked at her curves like she was the only masterpiece in the room and decided he was keeping her. Jordan Baxter had learned the hard way that society only forgave a woman for existing if she took up as little space as possible. As a black woman with thick thighs, a heavy bust, and soft curves, taking up little space was physically impossible. And the people in her life never let her forget it. She stood in the dimly lit, cramped back office of the Obsidian Lounge, one of the most exclusive and corrupt underground clubs in the city. The bass from the dance floor rattled the cheap plaster walls of her office, a stark contrast to the velvet and gold leaf luxury out front. Jordan was the club's lead financial auditor, the brain keeping the entire multi-million-dollar operation afloat. Yet, she was hidden away like a dirty secret. The door swung open, hitting the wall with a sharp thud. Sebastian walked in, fixing the cuffs of his tailored bartender uniform. He was her ex-boyfriend and the current golden boy of the club's management. "Did you finish the quarterly reports yet?" Sebastian snapped, not even looking her in the eye. "I put them on Valerie's desk an hour ago," Jordan replied, keeping her eyes glued to her spreadsheet. Her voice was steady, but her chest tightened. It always did when he was near. Sebastian finally looked at her, his eyes scanning her seated form with undisguised disgust. "Good, stay back here tonight. The VIPs are coming in, and Valerie wants the floor looking aesthetic." "You know what I mean." Jordan gripped her pen until her knuckles turned ashen. "I know exactly what you mean, Sebastian. I don't fit the sleek and slender brand." "Don't play the victim, Jordan," he sighed, leaning against the doorframe, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "I told you a year ago, if you just dropped 40 or 50 pounds, I wouldn't have had to leave you for someone who actually cares about their appearance. You have a pretty face. It's a shame you let the rest of yourself go to waste." The words were a familiar, jagged knife twisting in her gut. For 2 years, Sebastian had chipped away at her self-esteem, convincing her that her natural curves were a deformity. He had isolated her, manipulated her, and then discarded her the moment he got a promotion, replacing her with one of the club's rail-thin cocktail waitresses. "Get out," Jordan whispered, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. Sebastian chuckled, turning on his heel. "Just stay out of sight, Jordan. The Korean syndicate is taking the main suite tonight. If you waddle out there and embarrass us, Valerie will fire you." When the door clicked shut, Jordan let out a shaky breath, pressing the palms of her hands against her eyes. She hated that he still had the power to make her feel so incredibly small. She looked down at her body, her soft stomach, her wide hips. Was she really so unlovable? But there was no time to cry. The Obsidian Lounge was in a state of absolute panic. The city's underworld had been quietly taken over by a new, ruthless faction of the Korean mafia. The boss was a ghost to most, a brutal tactician who operated in the shadows. He went by his Western business name in the States, Taylor. No last name, no paper trail, just whispered rumors of men disappearing into the river if they crossed him. And tonight, Taylor was in the building. An hour later, the intercom on Jordan's desk buzzed violently. It was Valerie, the club's elitist manager. "Jordan, get up to the VIP suite right now. Bring the secondary ledgers. The hidden ones." Jordan's heart stopped. "Valerie, I'm not supposed to be on the floor," Sebastian said. "I don't care what Sebastian said," Valerie shrieked through the speaker, sounding utterly terrified. "He wants to see the real numbers. He knows we've been skimming. Bring them now, or we're all dead." Swallowing her fear, Jordan gathered the heavy leather-bound ledgers. She smoothed down her tight black pencil skirt and the simple emerald green blouse that hugged her chest. She didn't have time to change into anything less revealing. She stepped out into the neon-soaked hallway, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. 2 massive guards in tailored black suits stood outside the reinforced doors of the VIP suite. They patted her down with silent, intimidating efficiency before opening the doors. The suite was bathed in low amber light. Valerie and Sebastian stood near a glass coffee table, both pale and trembling. And sitting on the plush leather sofa, shrouded in the shadows of the room, was him, Taylor. He was strikingly handsome, with sharp, aristocratic features, jet black hair styled impeccably, and dark eyes that absorbed the light in the room. He wore a charcoal three-piece suit that cost more than Jordan made in a year. The aura of danger radiating from him was so thick it practically choked the oxygen out of the air. Here are the files, Mr. Taylor, Valerie stammered, gesturing wildly to Jordan as she walked in. Jordan approached, her legs feeling like lead. Her hips swayed naturally with every step, a movement she usually tried to suppress, but the heavy ledgers in her arms made her off balance. As she neared the table, Sebastian stepped forward, trying to play the hero. Let me take those, sir, Sebastian said smoothly, reaching for the books. Our accountant is a bit clumsy. Big girls like her aren't built for grace. Jordan flinched, her grip faltering. The heavy ledgers slipped from her hands, crashing onto the glass table. One of the books slid, knocking over a crystal decanter of $200 whiskey. The amber liquid splashed directly onto Taylor's polished leather shoes and the hem of his tailored trousers. The room went dead silent. The sound of a gun cocking from the shadows echoed loudly. I am so sorry, Jordan gasped, dropping to her knees, grabbing a silk napkin to wipe his shoes. Her heart hammered wildly against her ribs. She was going to die. Sebastian had warned her, and now her clumsy, awkward body had just signed her death warrant. Get up, a voice commanded. It was deep, smooth, and laced with absolute authority. Jordan froze. She looked up, her dark skin flushed with embarrassment, her brown eyes wide with terror. Taylor leaned forward, the ambient light finally catching his face. He wasn't looking at the whiskey. He wasn't looking at the ledgers. His dark, predatory eyes were locked entirely on Jordan. His gaze dragged slowly from the soft curve of her hips, kneeling on the floor, up to the full swell of her chest, heaving with panic, and finally to her terrified, beautiful face. Sebastian panicked, stepping forward. I apologize for the mess, sir. She's an idiot. I'll have her fired immediately. She's completely useless. Taylor didn't even look at Sebastian. He raised a single, gloved hand. Instantly, one of the guards stepped forward and slammed the butt of a pistol directly into Sebastian's jaw. Sebastian crumpled to the floor with a pathetic groan, blood pouring from his mouth. Valerie screamed, covering her face. I did not give you permission to speak, Taylor said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He looked back down at Jordan, his expression softening into something entirely unexpected. Hunger. Fascination. Reverence. He reached down, his large, warm hand gently gripping her chin. His thumb brushed over her full lower lip, sending a shockwave of electricity straight to her core. You, Taylor murmured, his eyes blazing as he took in every inch of her voluptuous frame. What is your name? Jordan, she whispered, her breath hitching. Taylor stood up, pulling her gently to her feet with an effortless display of strength. He stood inches from her. He was massive, a foot taller than her, completely enveloping her in his scent of expensive cologne and gunpowder. Tell me, Jordan, Taylor said softly, his eyes flicking to the bleeding Sebastian on the floor, and then back to her. Why is a woman of such absolute perfection hiding in the shadows of this miserable club? Jordan couldn't process the words. Perfection? She stared at Taylor, searching his dark, stoic face for the punchline of a cruel joke. Sebastian had conditioned her for years to expect mockery, but there was no amusement in Taylor's eyes. There was only a burning, intense possession that made her knees feel weak. I'm just the auditor, Jordan managed to stammer, instinctively trying to cross her arms over her stomach to hide her curves. Taylor gently but firmly caught her wrists, pulling her arms back to her sides. Do not hide yourself, he commanded softly, his thumbs tracing the frantic pulse at her wrists. Not from me. Valerie, trembling in the corner, finally found her voice. Mr. Taylor, please, she's just a backroom employee. The ledgers are right there. The money we owe you. The money is irrelevant, Taylor interrupted, his gaze never leaving Jordan. I know exactly how much you've been stealing from my syndicate, Valerie. I know Sebastian has been altering the liquor invoices to skim off the top. I know this because I have been reviewing the digital footprints. He paused, a dark smirk playing on his lips. And I know that the only reason this club hasn't gone completely bankrupt is because of the brilliant financial gymnastics of your auditor. Jordan gasped. He knew her work? Get out, Taylor said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper as he finally tore his eyes away from Jordan to look at Valerie and the groaning Sebastian. Both of you. If I see either of your faces before I leave this building, my men will cut them off. Valerie didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed the bleeding Sebastian by the collar, dragging him out of the suite and shutting the heavy doors behind them. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with unspoken tension. Jordan stood frozen in the center of the room, acutely aware that she was now entirely alone with the most dangerous man in the city. Taylor stepped closer, closing the distance between them until her chest was nearly brushing his suit jacket. They are blind, he said, his voice a low rumble in his chest, surrounded by a goddess, and they treat you like a servant. Why are you doing this? Jordan whispered, her walls firmly up despite the intoxicating heat radiating from him. People like you don't notice people like me. Taylor reached out, his knuckles grazing the soft, full curve of her hip. Jordan inhaled sharply, a shiver running down her spine. People like me, he corrected, his eyes darkening. No value when we see it. I have watched men kill each other for diamonds, Jordan. But you are something entirely different. A masterpiece of flesh and blood. He walked over to the desk, picking up one of the heavy ledgers. You owe my syndicate $5 million. Or rather, Valerie does. But I am not here for the money. He tossed the ledger back onto the table. I am taking ownership of the Obsidian Lounge tonight, and I want you to run it. Jordan's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. Me? Run the club? But I don't know anything about management. I just do the numbers. And my look. I don't fit the image. Taylor closed the gap between them again, his hands resting firmly on her waist. He gripped her thick curves with a reverence she had never experienced in her entire life. I make the rules now, Jordan. And I say you are exactly what power looks like. You will run this club. You will restructure it. And you will answer only to me. He pulled a sleek black burner phone from his inner pocket and slipped it into her hand, his fingers lingering over hers. I have a flight to catch. A war on the East Coast requires my attention. But I will be back. If anyone in this city touches you, if that pathetic bartender speaks to you again, you press the only number saved in that phone. Before Jordan could say another word, Taylor turned and walked out of the suite, his guards falling in line behind him like shadows. Jordan stood there for a long time, clutching the phone to her chest. Her reality had just been violently shattered and rebuilt in the span of 20 minutes. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible. She felt dangerous. But the high didn't last long. 3 hours later, the club was closing down. Jordan had spent the remainder of the shift locked in her office, terrified to step out. When she finally grabbed her coat and purse to leave, the back alley behind the club was dead quiet, save for the flickering hum of a broken street lamp. As she walked toward her modest sedan, a figure stepped out from behind a dumpster. Sebastian. His jaw was heavily bruised, sporting an ugly purple welt, and his eyes were manic. He smelled of cheap whiskey and desperation. You think you're clever, don't you? Sebastian spat, blocking her path. Jordan backed up, her hand instinctively digging into her purse for her pepper spray. Leave me alone, Sebastian. You set me up, he yelled, taking a menacing step toward her. You seduced that mafia freak to steal my promotion. You stupid, fat. He lunged forward, his hands reaching for her throat. Jordan screamed, throwing her arms up to protect her face. But Sebastian never made contact. A massive hand shot out from the darkness, gripping Sebastian by the back of his neck. Jordan stumbled backward, gasping for air, as she watched a giant of a man, one of Taylor's guards from earlier, lift Sebastian completely off the ground. The man, whose name she would later learn was Gideon, had eyes as cold as a Siberian winter. The boss said if you spoke to her again, you'd lose the privilege of speech, Gideon stated in a thick, gravelly voice. With a sickening crack, Gideon drove his knee into Sebastian's ribs, snapping bone. Sebastian wailed in agony, collapsing to the dirty pavement like a broken rag doll, clutching his side. Gideon didn't spare him another glance. He stepped over Sebastian's writhing body and opened the back door of a heavily armored black SUV that had silently pulled into the alleyway. Miss Baxter, Gideon said, gesturing toward the open door. Your ride is here. Jordan peered into the dark interior of the vehicle. Sitting in the back seat, nursing a glass of bourbon, was Taylor. He hadn't left the city at all. Get in, Jordan, Taylor said, his dark eyes flashing with a predatory gleam. We have a lot to discuss about your future. Taking a deep breath, Jordan stepped over her ex-boyfriend's crying form and climbed into the car of the most dangerous man she had ever met. The heavy, bulletproof doors of the armored SUV sealed shut with a soft click, instantly plunging the interior into a quiet, leather-scented cocoon. The violent sounds of the alleyway, Sebastian's pathetic whimpering, and the distant wail of city sirens were entirely muted. Jordan sat frozen against the pristine upholstery, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She kept her hands tightly folded in her lap, hyper-aware of the space she took up on the seat. Taylor sat beside her, perfectly relaxed, swirling a measure of amber liquid in a heavy baccarat crystal glass. He didn't look like a man who had just ordered a brutal assault. He looked like a CEO winding down after a board meeting. He wore a bespoke Brioni suit that clung to his broad shoulders, his dark eyes calmly assessing her trembling form in the dim light of the cabin. Breathe, Jordan, he commanded softly, his voice a rich baritone that vibrated through the quiet space. You are safe now. No one will ever speak to you like that again. Not him, not Valerie, not anyone. Jordan swallowed hard, finally finding her voice. Where are we going? You said you had a flight to the East Coast. You said there was a war. Taylor took a slow sip of his bourbon. There is. But sending my lieutenants to handle the territory dispute in Boston is a small price to pay to ensure my newest asset is properly secured. He leaned closer, the scent of bergamot and expensive tobacco washing over her. And my most valuable asset is sitting right next to me. The SUV glided smoothly through the neon-lit streets of the city, eventually pulling into the underground private garage of the Saint. Regis Residences, one of the most heavily guarded and exclusive high-rises in the state. Gideon opened the door for them, and Jordan was escorted into a private elevator that shot up to the penthouse floor. When the mahogany doors parted, Jordan gasped. The penthouse was a sprawling masterpiece of modern architecture, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic, glittering view of the entire city skyline. It was decorated in deep charcoals, rich mahogany, and subtle gold accents. But what caught her attention most was the massive dining table set for two, overflowing with a spectacular spread of food: roasted duck, truffled mashed potatoes, honey-glazed root vegetables, and thick cuts of prime rib. You haven't eaten since noon, Taylor said casually, shrugging off his suit jacket and tossing it to an awaiting associate. Your blood sugar is low. It makes you anxious. Jordan turned to him, stunned. How could you possibly know when I last ate? Taylor walked toward the table, pulling out a chair for her. Because I have been watching you, Jordan, for 3 months. Ever since my syndicate began laying the groundwork to acquire the Obsidian Lounge, I have been reviewing every camera feed, every ledger, every piece of data. I watched you sit in that cramped, unventilated back office for 12 hours a day. I watched you skip lunch to fix Valerie's accounting errors. I watched that insect, Sebastian, belittle you while you single-handedly kept his operation from sinking. He pressed a gentle hand to the small of her back, guiding her to the seat. The warmth of his touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to her core. Sit, he instructed. Eat. Jordan sat down, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information. If you've been watching me, why didn't you step in sooner? Why tonight? Taylor took the seat opposite her, pouring her a glass of sparkling water. Because tonight was the deadline for the club's debt, and because tonight I saw him make you cry. A dangerous, lethal shadow crossed his aristocratic features. I do not tolerate the disrespect of what belongs to me. I don't belong to you, Jordan said softly, her natural defiance flaring up despite her fear. She was a black woman who had fought tooth and nail for her degree in finance. She wasn't about to become a mafia boss's pet. Taylor's lips curved into a devastating, genuine smile. Good, keep that fire. You will need it to run the club. He gestured to the food. Please, indulge. In my culture and in my personal view, a woman with your abundance is a symbol of prosperity, power, and absolute beauty. The Western world's obsession with starvation is a weakness. I prefer a woman who commands the space she occupies. A hot flush crept up Jordan's neck. No man had ever spoken about her body like that. Not as a fetish, not as a flaw to be tolerated, but as something divine. As she ate, the tension slowly drained from her muscles. The food was incredible, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to count calories or apologize for taking a second helping. Taylor watched her eat with a look of profound satisfaction, as if her simply existing in his space was a victory. After dinner, Taylor led her to a massive master bedroom suite. Laid out on the king-size bed were dozens of velvet boxes and garment bags bearing the logos of high-end designers. Tomorrow, you return to the club as its supreme director, Taylor explained, leaning against the doorframe. Valerie has already been notified of her termination, but an empire requires a uniform. I had a team of tailors prepare these for you based on the security footage measurements. Jordan walked over to the bed, unzipping the first bag. Inside was a stunning, custom-tailored power suit in a deep, rich burgundy. It wasn't designed to hide her figure. It was meticulously cut to accentuate her thick thighs, cinch her waist, and flatter her heavy bust. There were silk blouses, wide-leg trousers, and a pair of Christian Louboutin heels with the signature red soles. You did all this today? Jordan whispered, trailing her fingers over the expensive fabrics. I protect my investments, Jordan, Taylor said softly, walking up behind her. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a heavy, magnetic weight against her back. Sebastian convinced you that you were invisible. Tomorrow, I want you to walk into that club and blind every single person in the room. The next evening, Jordan did exactly that. When she stepped out of Taylor's black SUV in front of the Obsidian Lounge, the atmosphere shifted instantly. She wore the burgundy suit, the fabric hugging her curves like liquid armor. Her dark skin glowed under the neon streetlights, her hair styled in a sleek, powerful updo. Gideon flanked her right side, and two other heavily armed guards flanked her left. As she walked through the front doors, the music seemed to drop. The bouncers, the bartenders, the VIPs, everyone stopped and stared. She wasn't the clumsy, hidden auditor anymore. She was a queen, stepping into her court. Valerie was standing by the bar, holding a cardboard box of her belongings, looking pale and utterly defeated. When she saw Jordan, a mix of rage and terror crossed her face. Jordan didn't gloat. She simply walked past Valerie, her red-soled heels clicking authoritatively on the marble floor. Leave the keys on the counter, Valerie, Jordan said coldly, not even turning her head. And if you ever try to contact the suppliers again, my associates will have a conversation with you. Valerie scurried out of the club like a frightened rat. Jordan took her place in the elevated VIP glass office overlooking the dance floor, the office Sebastian had desperately coveted. She sat in the leather chair, looking out over the empire that was now hers to command. She had the brains, she had the power, and for the first time, she had the confidence. But in the dangerous world of the Korean mafia, peace was always a temporary illusion, and Jordan was about to learn that power painted a massive target on her back. Running the Obsidian Lounge was not merely a matter of ordering liquor and managing VIP lists. Jordan quickly discovered she was the central artery for a massive, multi-state money laundering operation. Taylor's syndicate funneled millions of dollars in illicit cash through the club's casino backrooms and high-stakes poker tables. Every night, Jordan sat in the glass-enclosed office above the dance floor, her brilliant mathematical mind sanitizing the dirty money, making it invisible to the IRS and federal regulators. For a month, the operation ran flawlessly. Under Jordan's command, profits skyrocketed by 40%. She restructured the staff, paid the waitresses a living wage so they couldn't be bribed by rival gangs, and tightened the security protocols. Taylor visited her every evening, always bringing her exquisite gifts, a Cartier watch, a rare first edition book, a necklace of black pearls that rested beautifully against her deep cleavage. Their relationship was a slow, agonizing burn. He was fiercely protective, infinitely respectful. Yet, the raw, predatory hunger in his eyes whenever he looked at her told her he was holding back a tidal wave of desire. But the success of the Obsidian Lounge had not gone unnoticed. It was a Tuesday night, typically the slowest shift of the week. Jordan was deep into a spreadsheet, cross referencing shell corporations, when the music on the main floor abruptly cut off. She frowned, looking down through the one way glass of her office. The club was dead silent. The patrons were frozen. Gideon and the rest of Taylor's security team had their weapons drawn, aiming at the front entrance. Strolling through the doors, flanked by a dozen men carrying automatic weapons, was Lorenzo. Lorenzo was the underboss of the most brutal Italian faction in the city, a man known for skinning his enemies alive. He wore a flashy white suit and a mocking grin. He stopped in the center of the dance floor, looking up directly at Jordan's hidden office. Taylor! Lorenzo shouted, his raspy voice echoing through the silent club. I know you're hiding your new little pet in there! Come out, or we start shooting the civilians! Jordan's blood ran cold. Taylor wasn't there. He was at the docks, securing a shipment of smuggled weaponry. She was entirely alone, armed with nothing but 5 security guards against Lorenzo's heavily armed dozen. Gideon's voice crackled through the earpiece on Jordan's desk. Miss Baxter, stay down. We are outnumbered. I have signaled the boss, but he is 20 minutes away. Do not leave the office. But Jordan knew Lorenzo. She had read his files when analyzing the city's power dynamics. If she hid, he would slaughter the innocent patrons just to make a point. Taking a deep, stabilizing breath, Jordan stood up. She smoothed down her tailored black dress, the fabric emphasizing her wide hips and full chest. She bypassed Gideon's orders, unlocked the reinforced office door, and stepped out onto the metal catwalk overlooking the floor. Taylor isn't here, Lorenzo, Jordan's voice rang out, remarkably steady and echoing with authority. This is my club. State your business or get out. Lorenzo looked up, his mocking grin faltering for a fraction of a second before returning, uglier than before. He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering cruelly on her heavy frame. Well, well. I heard the Korean ghost took a liking to a civilian, but I didn't realize he had such immense tastes. What's the matter, sweetheart? Taylor couldn't find a woman who fits into a standard dress size. The men behind him snickered. A month ago, those words would have broken Jordan. They would have sent her spiraling into a pit of self-hatred. But tonight, wearing the confidence Taylor had helped her forge, the insult bounced off her like a rubber bullet. Is that why you brought 12 armed men to a nightclub on a Tuesday, Lorenzo? Jordan retorted, leaning gracefully against the railing. To critique my wardrobe? I expected more from the man who supposedly runs the South Side. You sound like a jealous ex-boyfriend. Lorenzo's face flushed with violent anger. The humor vanished from his eyes. You listen to me, you fat bitch. You're laundering money in my territory. This block belongs to my family. You're going to empty the vault, transfer the digital assets to my accounts, and then maybe I'll let you walk out of here alive. Bring her down. 2 of Lorenzo's men rushed the stairs. Gideon stepped out of the shadows, double tapping his silenced pistol. Both of Lorenzo's men dropped dead before they reached the first landing. Chaos erupted. Lorenzo's men opened fire, shattering the glass of the VIP booths. Screams filled the air as patrons dropped to the floor. Jordan hit the deck, crawling back into the reinforced office as bullets pinged against the bulletproof glass. Gideon! Jordan yelled into the intercom. The ventilation system! Funnel them to the east corridor! Jordan hadn't just audited the club's finances. She had memorized the architectural blueprints. She slammed her hand down on the security control panel, overriding the electronic doors. She locked down the main exits and plunged the east corridor into pitch darkness. Lorenzo's men, confused by the shifting doors, were funneled exactly where she wanted them. In the dark, Gideon and the remaining guards picked them off with military precision. Suddenly, the reinforced door of Jordan's office shuddered. Someone was overriding the lock from the outside. A heavy explosive charge blew the hinges off, sending Jordan flying backward onto the plush carpet, her ears ringing from the concussive blast. Through the smoke, Lorenzo stepped in, his face splattered with blood, aiming a silver revolver directly at her head. Clever girl, Lorenzo panted, stepping over the debris. But not clever enough. I'm going to blow your brains out, and then I'm going to send Taylor your head in a pastry box. Jordan backed away, her heart thrashing in her throat. She had nowhere left to run. Lorenzo pulled back the hammer of the gun. Bang! Jordan flinched, waiting for the pain, but it never came. Instead, Lorenzo's eyes widened in shock. A gaping, bloody hole appeared in the center of his chest. He dropped to his knees, coughing up dark blood, before collapsing face first onto the carpet. Standing in the doorway, the smoke swirling around him like a vengeful demon, was Taylor. His suit was perfectly intact, but his eyes were entirely feral. The barrel of his custom handgun was still smoking. Behind him, the remaining members of Lorenzo's crew were already dead on the floor. Taylor didn't say a word. He dropped his weapon, crossed the room in 3 massive strides, and hauled Jordan off the floor. He crushed her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her waist with a desperate, crushing grip. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling her scent deeply, his massive frame actually trembling. Taylor, Jordan gasped, wrapping her arms around his broad shoulders, burying her face in his chest. You came. I will always come for you, he rasped, pulling back just enough to frame her face with his large hands. He scanned her frantically for injuries, his thumbs wiping a smudge of soot from her cheek. Did he touch you? If he touched you, I will resurrect him, just to kill him. Again. I'm fine, she whispered, her eyes welling with tears. I held them off. I used the security doors. Taylor looked at the dead bodies, then back to her, a profound mixture of awe and raw desire burning in his eyes. You are magnificent, he murmured. Unable to hold back any longer, Taylor crashed his lips down onto hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a fierce, consuming claim. Jordan gasped into his mouth, her hands gripping his lapels as he backed her up against the edge of the desk. He kissed her like she was oxygen, and he had been drowning for a lifetime. His hands roamed over her body, worshiping the heavy curve of her hips, the fullness of her thighs, pulling her flush against him so she could feel exactly how much she affected him. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing heavily, Taylor rested his forehead against hers. Tomorrow, we declare war on the Italians, he whispered softly. But tonight, I am taking you home. But as they walked out of the ruined club, stepping over the glass and bodies, a new threat was already brewing in the shadows. Miles away, in a brightly lit federal building, Sebastian sat across from Special Agent Miller of the FBI Organized Crime Division. Sebastian's jaw was still wired shut from Gideon's attack, but he managed to slide a stolen USB drive across the table. It contained every encrypted ledger Jordan had worked on. I can give you the Korean ghost, Sebastian mumbled through his teeth, his eyes gleaming with malicious revenge. But I want immunity. And I want you to lock his fat accountant in a federal prison for the rest of her miserable life. The fallout didn't come with gunfire. It arrived at dawn with a sharp knock. At exactly 6 a.m., federal agents flooded the St. Regis penthouse. Jordan stood by the window in a silk robe, coffee in hand, while Taylor calmly closed the dossier before him. Gideon's voice crackled over the intercom. FBI, organized crime. They've got a warrant. Taylor didn't react. His eyes found Jordan steady, unreadable. Minutes later, the penthouse swarmed with agents. Special Agent Miller stepped forward, indictments in hand. Behind him stood Sebastian, jaw wired, smiling like he'd already won. We're not here for you, Miller said to Taylor, pointing at Jordan. We're here for her. Jordan Baxter, you are under arrest for money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Jordan's pulse spiked, but she didn't show it. Power is posture. She extended her wrists calmly. I'll cooperate. Taylor stepped forward, lethal tension radiating from him, but Jordan stopped him with a glance. Trust me. 2 hours later, she stood in a federal courtroom, composed and immaculate. The USB drive sat on the prosecution's table, Sebastian's weapon. It proves her crimes, Miller declared. Judge Hawthorne turned. Miss Baxter? Jordan rose, unshaken. The evidence is real, she said evenly. But your conclusion is wrong. A ripple moved through the courtroom. You missed a basic forensic flaw, she continued, stepping forward. That ledger isn't a record of my crimes, it's a trap. Sebastian's smile faltered. When I audited the club, I discovered ongoing theft, Jordan said. So I created a shadow ledger to track it. The money doesn't lead to me or Taylor. She turned, locking eyes with Sebastian. It leads to offshore accounts under SV management, his accounts. Silence shattered into chaos. That's a lie, Sebastian shouted. Check the metadata, Jordan replied coolly. Every transaction matches his biometric signature. 10 minutes later, confirmation arrived. Agent Miller's voice dropped. She's right. Arrest him, the judge ordered. Sebastian was dragged away, shouting, as Jordan stood still, finally free. Outside the courtroom, Taylor waited. He studied her with something deeper than admiration. You didn't need me, he said quietly. Jordan smiled. I told you, I'm good with numbers. He pulled her close, sealing her victory with a kiss. And just like that, the war was over. Did Jordan's journey from a bullied auditor to the queen of the syndicate leave you breathless? If you loved this dramatic mafia romance, hit that like button to show your support. Don't forget to share this story with your friends who love a good twist, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another intense romance. Drop a comment below, what would you have done in Jordan's shoes?